Hello, welcome to the Paddock Pass podcast brought to you by Renthal Street. It's Christmas time, so there's no better time than right now to check out the Fit My Bike tool on renthal.com. And whether it's a Christmas present for yourself or a Christmas present for a loved one, there's no better present than parts for your bike. And David Emmett, I'm sure you'd gladly appreciate some new parts for yourself right now. You're a bit under the weather.
Yes, I'm still suffering the aftermath of a very, very long year, plus whatever I picked up, the dreaded lurgy I picked up at Barcelona. So I'm not in the best of shape.
Neil Morrison, I'd imagine you're not in the best of shape either. Probably still a little bit hungover from the Girona match on Tuesday. That's why we're actually recording a little bit later in the week, just for Champions League Tuesday, Neil.
Exactly. Yes. Apologies for the lateness. I had to jaunt up north to go and see some football, which was very pleasant. And after like 3 months of almost recording the podcast every day, I have to say I've been in a bit of withdrawal from a lot of you for the last 2 weeks. I mean, 2 weeks without a pod seems like a lifetime. I find I've been swearing profusely to make up for the lack of David Emmett in my life. I've been tutting and rolling my eyes quite a lot at people to make up for the lack of Adam Wheeler in my life. So, good to see you, boys.
And you've been playing golf to make up for the lack of Stephen English in your life, I'm sure, obviously. Adam, it might have felt like a lifetime for Neil since we were recording last. It probably felt like a lifetime for you since QPR won. And finally, a win against Nick Harris's Oxford United.
Steve, we're 4 matches unbeaten now. We've risen from the foot of the championship to the dizzying heights of 19th. So
we go a few weeks without a pod ad, and I stopped paying attention to QPR's results.
No, we're on a run of form. We're sailing up the league.
Well, I need to know, because I know nothing about football. Is QPR the Raul Fernandez of football, or are they the Joan Mir of football?
I don't think there's an equivalent. We do well at playing against very good teams, and then the games we're expected to win against slightly lesser opposition, we fail miserably. So what is the equivalent of that in MotoGP?
Maverick Vinales.
Oh, yeah, I guess, yeah.
Oh, I'll tell you what, Dave. It's interesting you bring up Maverick, because this is our end of season wrap-up review show, and we're going to look back at some of our predictions at the start of the year. And Adam, you had Maverick as your surprise of the season. He was going to be the man that was going to make you look like a genius. And instead, he was the man that made you look like a Maverick Vinales fan. And ultimately, it never ends up well for anyone whenever that happens.
Steve,
you had Maverick
give me
as a big
something.
surprise.
Come on, give me by the third round. I had a little bit of credit, and I could feel quite smug for a couple of races there. But then, unfortunately for me, for Maverick and Aprilia, it kind of slipped into the all too predictableness of the unpredictableness of Maverick's speed and form.
Yeah, unfortunately, it is one of those situations where we're going to constantly remind you of your Maverick Vinales love. But the reason for that is you want him in your midfield. He's a good footballer. And I think we'll give you the benefit of the doubt, Ad. That clouded your judgment ever so slightly?
Yeah, well, he's more of a 10, drops off the front man, finds pockets of space. And, obviously being a MotoGP rider, he's very fit, which, is quite annoying after about an hour when you're trying to run round after him. Yeah, I think it's all going to be well in 2025, Steve. I mean, he's even hovering around, the KTM test team in Jerez this week. So he's definitely keen.
Yeah. BMW down there as well for a little bit of World Superbike testing as well. So Jerez busy right now, and Jerez always busy with all the young riders coming through as well. And Neil, that kind of brings us to your big, bold prediction for the 2024 season. In the Moto3 class, we were going to see that it was going to be, Danny Delgado, David Alonso, Rueda, Colin Vire, and even Ortola. They were the riders that you told us to keep an eye on in the Moto3 class. You really went out on a limb with those guys.
Exactly. I could have just saved everyone's time and just mentioned one of them, because the rest needn't really have shown up, I think, for the best part of Moto3. But was that the worst? Was that the worst prediction I made? I'm pretty sure there was a few others.
No, it certainly wasn't, Neil.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure there was a few others.
Rueda, Neil? You said Rueda would be world champ.
I think
he did have Rueda,
and he won one GP.
He did, yeah. Big disappointment.
In fairness, we shouldn't really blame anyone for only winning one GP in the Moto3 class, because that's the equivalent of winning 5 or 6 races in any given year.
Yeah.
Adam, you actually had David Alonso down as your clear championship favourite. You were straight in. David Alonso was going to win the Moto3 championship. And you had Fermin Aldeguer as your Moto2 champion. So you were 50-50.
Yeah, a little bit off in Moto 2. But then I think, as we've covered in the podcast this year, Moto 2 was a little bit of a sort of schizophrenic championship in 2024. I'm feeling far more content with my pick in Moto 3. And, well, yeah, I mean, it might be tough again to pick for Moto 2 next year.
Moto 2 and Moto 3 are always a bit tricky to pick for because you never know how riders are going to adapt onto the Moto 2 bike. You never know who's suddenly going to find that form to do what they did. None of us had Iagura down as our championship contender. We've always been big fans of I, but the step he made this year was obviously a bit of a surprise. I think for me, though, Dave, the biggest surprise from our preseason predictions, and nobody saw this one coming, David Emmett, the world champion of Moto 3 fanboys. What happened, Dave?
Lots of things. Yeah,
Dutch happened.
Yeah, exactly. No, I mean, David Alonso was just so much better than everyone else. I mean, I don't even think he was massively more talented. I just think he was so much smarter. He was just so very good at picking his moment, waiting for the right moment, and doing, he kept on crossing the line first, or crossing the finish line first, which is the most important thing to do.
Yeah, it does go a long way to having a successful season, obviously enough. But Moto 3, Moto 2, they were good predictions. MotoGP is where it's at. And obviously, coming into the season, we had our predictions about who was going to win the World Championship. And David, you said Pecco. I think, Adam, you said Pecco as well. And Neil, you were quite interested on it. You said last season, Pecco made so many mistakes in the sprint races. This is where he needs to make his improvement this year. This is where Pecco's going to make his stance. He's going to take on Jorge Martin. And
then he picked Raul Fernandez.
Well,
yeah, that's the moment where we insert the wow, wow, wow audio.
But it is always interesting to see who's able to meet their expectations or exceed them. Pecco coming in as the world champion, Adam. We spoke about this actually on the preseason pod. And I think that was episode 389, maybe 389, 390. And always worth listening back to those now. But we spoke about the fact that Pecco against Martin was going to be the big thing. One of the categories you had as well for preseason predictions was who's going to be the biggest rider move of the year. And obviously, we all said at the time it's going to be underpinned by what Marc Marquez does. But it ended up where David Emmett had the biggest surprise at. He said Jorge Martin is going to Aprilia. And so it came out. The fact that David was able to predict something like that, the fact that David was able to win our Alpine Stars Fantasy League, maybe he's smarter than we give him credit for, Raj.
No,
he just taps into the matrix better than anyone else.
Yeah, that's right. I have my tentacles embedded deeply through the MotoGP timeline and looking into the future.
Even a broken clock is right twice a day.
Well, I'll tell you what, let's move it on to our review of the season, guys. So we'll go to the easy ones first. Your best race of the year. So David, I'll come to you first, actually, just for your best race of the year.
Well, I mean, like I've got sort of two, if you like. I think there weren't very many good races. I mean, it wasn't a great year for MotoGP. There were a few sort of crackers. Le Mans was an exciting race, but I think if I had to choose one, I'd probably Jerez, because we got to see sort of like the shape of the championship, if you like. We got to see Jorge Martin crashing out of the lead, Marc Marquez hunting down Pecco Bagnaia and really going backwards and forwards, and it was just it was just incredibly tense. It had so much tension, so much sort of excitement. You knew that things were going to happen, but it was really hard to say, exactly how it would play out. And it was, like I say, it felt like a real sort of glimpse of the future, a glimpse of the whole season is sort of also Pedro Acosta crashing out, looking strong and then crashing out. That was, it was just a proper MotoGP weekend. It was a reflection of the season.
Yeah, I think that's a fair shout. Neil, what about you? What was your MotoGP of the year?
Yeah, I think Dave's right in that we had a really good championship battle. I think it was a memorable season for that. And we had two great champions fighting each other up until the final race, which was keeping everyone interested all season long, which was just as well, because as Dave said, it wasn't really a great season for racing, I don't think. I mean, I can maybe count on one hand the number of what I would call really good races. Lots of interesting races towards the end of the year. And again, that was maybe because so much was riding on it because the championship was at play. But if you're looking at really top races, I think you only have a selection of maybe 4 or 5, 4 maybe at most. So I'm going to go with COTA, which was, I think, the first of those, because we had a bit of a drab race in Qatar. Then Portugal was dramatic, but wasn't necessarily a fantastic race. And then we had this kind of explosion in COTA, which has never really been a fantastic track for racing in the past. So there was definitely a surprise element there. But there were so many factors that made this just brilliant and exciting. I mean, the racing for one was epic. Mark fighting with Pedro Acosta and a couple of Ducatis. Martin, Bagnaia was struggling. We weren't really sure what was going on there. And then Mark crashed out. And then, of course, Acosta was in the lead, and there was a chance of Acosta becoming the youngest ever Premier Class race winner at the time. And it didn't quite work out that way because Maverick Vinales had his 1 in every 40 race performances where he was absolutely sensationally unbeatable. And yeah, you probably have to rank it as Maverick's best ever performance. And his comeback from 12th, 13th at turn 1 had a terrible getaway, terrible first corner. And the way he ripped up through the field was kind of breathtaking and a joy to behold. And at the time, I remember thinking and speaking to several colleagues who thought the same, that this was the sign of things to come. And I guess it's maybe a little disappointing that some of the big storylines in that race didn't quite come to pass. Like, were Aprilia going to be regularly fighting at the front? Could Maverick be finally ready to become a challenger? Was Acosta going to be fighting for victories most weekends? We only had that intermittently through the season afterwards. And Ducati at that point looked a little bit in trouble. And obviously that was reversed fairly quickly after the race in COTA. So yeah, I would say COTA just for the kind of the wealth of storylines that were going on at the time.
Yeah, I think that's a fair shout, Neil. COTA was my favourite race of the year just because we had 3 different manufacturers on the podium. The surprise winner in a lot of ways for Vinales, even though Adam, as I'm sure you would have said at the time, Vinales having those strong results at the start of the year wasn't that big of a surprise, but it was just as the year went on how it changed. So for me, it was COTA. What about you, though, Adam?
Worthy shouts by the guys for COTA for sure. I think, as kind of Neil hinted, in the second year of the sprint concept, MotoGP is a little bit in transition. I mean, we had pockets of fantastic action, but it felt like the Sunday races were longer than, I mean, that's a typical Grand Prix. That's what we work all weekend for, to watch, and we look forward to, indulging and satisfying our urge for sort of some, gripping MotoGP action. I mean, the sprints are almost kind of like a preview, if you like, but it seemed on occasion in 2024 that the sprint kind of ticked that box, and then, MotoGP was more drawn out. But yeah, there were snapshots. I mean, we had some really tasty stuff. I was at the FIM Awards last weekend in Mallorca, and Jorge Villegas, when he was lording over the champions, and of course Jorge Martin was last on stage to be celebrated as yeah, he was last on stage as the MotoGP number 1, and even he said, thank you so much for that, blaze of action at Malaysia, the first 4 laps of Pecco Bagnaia, where you had that fantastic backdrop of the championship against these 2 sort of peerless Ducati riders. And I think it's testament to how different Martin and Pecco are, and the fact that they're racing for different teams, but they were essentially on the same motorcycle, that it created a little bit of variation, I could say, in 2024 MotoGP. I mean, if we have the same scenario of Marc Marquez next year, then it could have one of those kind of McLaren and F1 in the 80s kind of feel, where there's nobody else in MotoGP apart from 2 red factory Ducatis. So yeah, I think that kind of helped mix things up a little bit. And the Pramac situation, the whole thing with Martin going to Aprilia, I mean, there were some sort of nice little ingredients. But also a worthy mention to Mugello, because that was the first time I think we really saw Marc Marquez and Pecco Bagnaia, go sort of head to head, and it was the kind of duel that people wanted to see. Of course, Marc, was on the year-old bike, but he's otherworldly, so it was good to see them go at it.
It's interesting about the sprints because I think it's a really good point. The trouble is that now the teams know and understand how the sprints work and how to use them, how to prepare. And so that's taken some of the excitement out of the sprints. Last year, it felt like the sprints where everyone was just like hammer and tongs. And now people are using it much more in terms of assessing tyres. They understand that it's not worth risking it all. You go out, if you think you can get the points, you can get the points. If you don't, then you just let it go. So I think that a lot of the excitement has been taken out of the sprints.
Yeah, I mean, I'm struggling to think of one sprint race this year which was really brilliant. I mean, we had several last year. I mean, the Portimao, Argentina ones that started the year were breathless and wild. But this year, in terms of real close frenetic action, we obviously had dramatic ones and ones that had big implications for the championship. But I'm struggling to think of one which really stands out as like, wow, that was a great race. So, yeah, I think that that sort of goes to what Dave was saying.
Yeah, and I think it kind of brings us into our next point as well about what was the worst race of the year. And for me, Silverstone was very disappointing because it's always such a good racetrack. And then Austria, for me, was the clear winner. But what about you, Neil?
Oh, I mean, I still wake up in a cold sweat during the night thinking about the sprint race in Austria and the Sunday race as well.
Did you have Moto E that weekend as well?
I did, yeah. MotoGP racing was actually really good that weekend. But
I'll take your word for it, Neil.
Yeah. The Sunday race in Austria, man. I mean, that was just a low. It was kind of, it just reflected everything that is wrong
with MotoGP.
MotoGP at the moment, in that it was the riders basically circulating around several seconds apart in more or less the same positions in which they qualified, with the one exception of Marc Marquez, who had a bit of a disastrous start and then had to make his way up through the field. But aside from that, there was really nothing to get excited about. And yeah, around somewhere like Austria as well, which has produced such great racing in the past, it just made me feel a little bit sad, to be honest. And that's not what you want when you're watching MotoGP.
Yeah, I mean, it just felt like 2008, 2009 all over again. It was just, the occasional great race and just, field strung out, basically qualifying order determining the order of finishing. And Austria was the absolute pinnacle of that. It was, just about who had the most horsepower and the most and the best setup and the best aero. It was absolutely dire.
And shout out to Adam, because I think he gave it a 7 in his ratings after the race. Dave and I were being extremely negative, I remember, and Adam was being a good sport, trying to put a positive spin on it.
I can't remember what score I gave it, but I'd like to take away about 10 points from whatever I gave it then. I think he might have given it a 2 or something. But
Adam gave it a 7, but then said his moment of the weekend was the fan cam, which I think showed us everything that we needed to know.
Yeah, I mean, Austria was also on my list, my nomination for this, because for the reasons you guys said, I think it was like 13 seconds divided the top 4 or 5, which
16,
quite rare. Oh, it's been quite rare in MotoGP.
Yeah.
I mean, especially when you go back to some corkers like Phillip Island, where you had the top 7 divided by less than a second or something. It just showed sort of the current predicament with tyre pressures, with aerodynamics, and what happens when you ruin a perfectly good racetrack with a stupid chicane. Even if it is in the name of safety, it just kind of chews up, what has been an impressive layout. I think I gave it a 7 that when we did the podcast after the race, purely because I was being slightly reverential to Bagnaia's form or capabilities, because it was a pretty masterful performance.
Yeah, I think you gave it a 7 because you had your good friend Matt Roberts with you that weekend, and that was the big reason. But in fairness to Austria, there was a great scrap for 10th position. That is literally all I can remember about Austria. I remember it was like Marquez, Paul, and maybe Maverick as well, and there were just half a second between them at the end, but it was just dire all the way. But let's move on from the negatives to the big positives of the year. And obviously we have our winners and losers at the end of each Grand Prix. But Adam, who was your winner at the end of the full season?
Oh goodness, the winner at the end of the full season. To be honest, there isn't anyone sort of that immediately stands out. I guess I'm going to say Pramac. Purely because under sort of the technical staff they have there with the crew chiefs and also with Gino Borsoi. Campianotti's pretty firmly ensconced in the setup in terms of marshalling things. I mean, not only did they win the World Championship, but then, they also signed a very juicy multi-year deal with Yamaha to sort of move into a new era. I mean, that's pretty ballsy when you're already fielding the most competitive machinery on the grid. And it has been for a couple of years and looks like it might be for another year or two. So I think, my nominations is going to be Pramac. But I thought we were going to move on to the best Grand Prix of the year, Steve, because I have a nomination for that. But I guess we'll get to that after our winners and losers.
Well, I just wanted to hear the winners and losers after the disappointments of hearing about Austria. So, David, what about you? Who was your big winner?
I think that Pramac is a really, really good shout, but I'm going to give it to Jorge Martin because he did everything he needed to do this year. He got it absolutely right. He worked on his weaknesses. And again, I think the best thing he did was to be open about using, like a sports psychologist, focusing on the mental side of racing, understanding what he needed to do on that side to make himself stronger. Because we saw in 23 that he's just got bags of talent, just not short of talent at all. He had loads of speed. There was lots of things that he was capable of doing, but the thing that got in his way was himself. And he put himself out of the way. He learned to put himself out of the way to allow himself to perform better. And for that, I mean, that's why I think he's the big winner, because he took such a huge step in understanding that it's his, it's his grey matter which matters most in racing, which gave him the step forward, and that's going to help him, I think, next year as well.
I thought Moto Matters mattered most in racing.
What about you, Neil? Who was your big winner?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to pretty much repeat just what the lads have said, but it really is difficult to look past Jorge Martin, just for the fact that it is so rare that we see a satellite rider win the ultimate prize in motorcycling. I mean, it's just been done, or it had been done 5 times before in the past. So Martin was the 6th independent rider, and I know he was on a full factory bike in more or less a factory team and a factory contracted rider, but still didn't have that official status. And yeah, what Dave said, he made a massive step forward mentally this year. Also, how he recovered from setbacks was always super impressive, because he did have some fairly consequential setbacks and things he had to pick himself up from, notably the crashes out of the lead in Jerez and the Saxon Ring.
Saxon Ring was really big because it was before the summer break and he had such a long time to think about it.
Yeah, Indonesia, and pretty much every setback that he had, he bounced back with a really strong performance, a really strong result. And also, it was really rare that the rider that didn't win the most races won the championship. I think that's only happened 8 times before in Grand Prix history, 76 occasions in the past. And it's never happened in such a massive scale. I mean, in 2006, Rossi won 5 races, Hayden won 2. In 13, Lorenzo won 8, Marquez won 6. Marquez was champion, obviously. And then in 2020, Mir won only once, and Franco Morbidelli won 3 times. So for Bagnaia to have won 11 and Martin just to have won 3, I mean, we've never had that kind of dynamic before, where one rider has been so much more ahead in terms of the win count. So for Martin to kind of put that to one side and always be focused on the ultimate job in hand, I think was extremely impressive. And just I remember at the start of this year thinking he's going to find it really difficult to kind of replicate the form of last year with all the distractions about his future, and there were plenty of distractions, and he still managed to keep his eyes on the prize. So he wasn't the fastest rider this year. Obviously Pecco was, but he was the smartest, and he was the rider in most control this year, which you have to applaud. I think he was definitely a worthy champion.
It's an interesting point about Pecco having won 11 versus Martin's 3 GPs, because if we were only racing GPs, then it would have been Pecco who was champion by, I think, about 10 points.
Is it also I mean, maybe it's a bit of an unfair question, but does it devalue Martin's championship a little bit? That he only won 3 Grand Prix?
No. Because I mean, in the end, it's the person with the most points under the scoring system, under the racing system, which we have, and we have 2 races each week, race weekend.
But
So it's as simple as that. It really is. It's the person with the most points at the end of the season is the person who understands it best. Because the thing is, once you start sort of like pulling it apart, how would the season have changed if we hadn't had the sprint races? How would Jorge Martin have changed if we hadn't had the sprint races? How would qualifying have changed? Because we'd still have something like FP4. Would he have been able to use that better? Would Pecco still have been so strong on a Sunday? It all becomes all sorts of hypotheticals which you can't do. You can only look at the way that the season works, sort of worked out. It's a bit like taking it, because like occasionally it's fun to take a particular rider out of a championship and then try and sort of like work out how things would have been. But you can't really do that, because when you do that, then it changes the entire dynamic of each race of a championship. The people would have got in each other's ways in a completely different way. They would have approached races in a completely different way. So I think it's simply everyone. You race under the rules which you have, and the person who comes out with the most points at the end is the champion.
But Dave, knowing your penchant for a spreadsheet and the fact you like tallying numbers, I mean, drawing a line on the 2024, do you have the feeling that Jorge Martin was like the best rider, if you know what I mean? It seemed like Pecco Bagnaia had more of an impact, or made more of an impact.
Jorge Martin was the best rider of 2024, full stop, because he was mentally stronger than Pecco Bagnaia. Bagnaia was faster sometimes, he was faster often, but he wasn't better. I mean, that's the point about it. It's the best rider who wins. Sometimes the best rider doesn't win. I mean, I massive respect to Nicky Hayden. I think Valentino Rossi was the better rider in 2020 in 2006 than Nicky Hayden. But Nicky Hayden did a much better job, and so he deserved that championship for beating Rossi with the tools that he had. But in this case, I think that Jorge Martin was the better rider because he did a better job. He had he improved his weaknesses, and he did exactly what he needed to do.
Yeah, I'd agree with that as well. I think it's one of those ones where there are no asterisks at the end of a season, and very quickly you forget that someone got injured, someone missed a few rounds, something happened to them technically, or they had crashes. You only remember who won the championship. And Martin, he knew what the game was, and the fact that you've got sprints and more races means that it's more and more important to finish all those races, because there where you get those chances to score points. And for me, Martin, very well deserving. But Adam, what about you? Who was your big loser for the season?
I've got a loser and a disappointment, Steve. So I just mentioned the loser, right? Okay. My loser, I'm actually going to nominate the calendar, because I think 6 GPs in 7 weeks was just absolutely mental. It was a brutal run. I by the end of it, I think even the upper tiers of management at Dorna were thinking, what on earth are we doing? I think the only people in the whole MotoGP community that probably liked it were the fans, which is an important thing because you get MotoGP every weekend.
The
and
fans
also the
living
riders.
and especially the fans living in Australia or the west coast of the US, who could finally actually watch the races at sort of normal times. But anywhere, everyone else was a loser.
Yeah, I think I also just mentioned that India was messy. We had Kazakhstan sort of stalling again. I don't think it wasn't a strong season for the real sort of stability of the global map of MotoGP, and I think that's something that will undoubtedly improve for 2025.
And your big loser then, Ad?
That
was my loser.
I thought that was your disappointment of the year.
No, I've got more. I've got more ammo.
Well, you said you were giving us 2, Ad. So what was your other one?
Well, my disappointment, really, I think, goes down to Luca Marini when he signed a contract with HRC. I doubt anyone would have told him, mate, in your first season, you're only going to score 14 points and you're going to be finishing last from the 22 riders on the grid in the championship. So I think it just, for the pro, I mean, they made progress, and you have to admire Marini's stoicism in accepting the situation and really just trying to soldier through it. But it was the most drastic of reverses from a rider that was, on the edge of podium finishes with, the VR46 team and Ducati to sort of, in theory, representing the biggest motorcycle manufacturer in the world and the most potent and decorated team in Grand Prix, then to sort of slide all the way back down there, I think that has to be ranked as a disappointment. And the fact that his teammate was just ahead of him in 21st, just kind of underlines how, batshit crazy it was for HRC in 2024.
Yeah, but the other side of that coin as well is when Marini signed for Honda, he was the only Ducati rider that didn't win a race the previous season. He's a good rider, but I've looking from the outside in, I've never understood why everyone's raved about him so much. I know, Dave, you love his debriefs, but on the racetrack, he's always been just a solid rider. And obviously going to Honda was always going to be a very tough situation. I don't think anyone thought it was going to be as tough as it was, like you said, Ad. But I don't think anyone expected him to go in and tear up any trees either.
No, but I mean, he did exactly what he's been hired to do. He's just incredibly smart. Everything we hear from Honda as well is he works really well in the garage. He's turned that team into a proper team. His communication is excellent. They're in development mode. He's the perfect rider for them there. So I think. I think Adam's being a bit harsh because, as my loser, I had Joan Mir down because Joan Mir should have done better. Joan Mir lost to both Taka Nakagami and to Johan Zarco in the championship. His races were incredibly predictable. It was start, crash, start, crash, start, crash. He was just... and a lot of the year as well, his mood was just very, very down. There was nothing. There was no sense of progress. There was nothing positive capable of him. I mean, I like the guy. I think he's a lovely young man. But he should have done better. He should have been smarter, and he wasn't. It just felt like pure frustration every time you talked to him. So for me, he was my big loser. Because he knew what he was getting himself into, and he should have done better.
Yeah, I think it's also one of those ones where Mir's a former world champion, so there's more expectation on what he's going to do. I think the fact that whenever he re-signed for Honda, everyone was just kind of like, well, that's paycheck racing at this stage because nothing's going to change for him after the 2 years he's had. But I'd also argue, Dave, if Luca Marini's job was to score points in 6 out of 20 races in what's basically the longest season of MotoGP we've ever seen, that's not what his job was. Honda expected a lot more than him for sure.
No, Honda understood what his job was. Honda understood where they are.
Yeah, and this, of course, was the season where Mir thought he was going to turn his fortunes around by changing sides of the garage, working with Marquez's old crew, and look what impact that had.
Yes. It was very much exactly the same as it was the year before. So
yeah, and the highlight for Marquez's crew was celebrating his wins for another team and another manufacturer.
I want to make one thing clear. I'm not arguing that either of them were any good this year. I think both of them were massive disappointments. But I'd take Mir as a bigger disappointment just because the expectation as a former world champion is higher. But my expectation for Marini wasn't particularly high to begin with. So
No, but I mean that's what I mean. Marini's job was to come in and help develop the bike, and that's exactly what he's doing.
Adam, you've been very keen to get to your best and worst events of the year. So, sorry, Big Neil. What was your big winner or big loser from the season?
Well, two really. The first one is Brad Binder, because after the first round of the season, after last season, when he finished fourth, and after the start of the season when he had 2 second places in Qatar, I thought that big things awaited Brad. Certainly regular fights towards the front, but from Portimao onwards, he just never really seemed at all comfortable on the bike. And we didn't see him on the podium again. We had a couple of good performances across the year. And in the end, he did relatively well to finish fifth in the championship, considering the struggles he had. But 76 points less than he managed in 2023. And just so many mistakes. And I know the KTM was very critical for him this year. KTM didn't manage to work out the new Michelin rear compound that seemed to throw every factory bar Ducati after the Jerez test. Those are factors that you have to consider. But I think Binder was a big disappointment in my view, and certainly a lot of the year didn't even look like the fastest guy in the KTM. You know, Acosta really did look like he was more capable of winning races at several points through the year. And then Marco Bezzecchi, I mean, I think I had it was maybe one of the few things I predicted correctly at the start of the year, that he was going to be in for a tough old run. And so it proved. I mean, Bezzecchi went from third in the 2023 championship to 12th in this year's championship with just one podium finish. He won, 3 races last year, and he scored just one podium this year at Jerez. Never was able to really find a cure for the issues that plagued the 2023 or the GP23 Ducati, and didn't see any progress, which does throw into question just how good a rider he is. When everything's right, he clearly is a very, very strong rider, but it will raise a few question marks with regards to just how strong he'll be developing the Aprilia's RSGP next year.
Yeah, I mean, a good point about Bezzecchi, but one thing about Binder is, you know, he was almost beaten by a rookie on a satellite team by 2 points. You know, and it came down to the last race for Binder to actually secure 5th in the championship. So, yeah, I think you're absolutely spot on.
And let's move it on then to best and worst events of the year. So, Ad, what was your best event of the year?
Best event? Well, considering we've talked about races, I think it's a bit more of a personal perspective. I quite enjoyed going to the Chang International Circuit for the first time and the Thai Grand Prix. Just seeing the different kind of flavour and how manic the fans are for MotoGP. That's something that sort of sticks in the mind. Maybe it is also recency bias, but it was, you know, having visited Buriram, I kind of think that starting the championship there is not such a bad call. You know, it does seem slightly odd to be venturing so far away from the European base for most of the teams, but I think it will be like you know, a splendid show. So but I also want to give a nod to Silverstone, Steve. I know you said the race was poor, and I agree, but I think the 75th commemoration celebrations for MotoGP this year added a really nice flavour there, you know, with all the bike liveries. I mean, that was a real kind
They
of
were
buzz.
Class. Yeah, they were really class.
I mean, some
most
of them
were class.
Yeah, most of them.
Some of them were a bit shit.
Yeah, but most of them were really good.
Which one was the shittest, Neil? That's the most important thing.
I mean, I don't want to seem like I'm picking on KTM here, but I mean, the Tech 3 ones were a bit uninspiring. You think of all the great Tech 3 liveries that they've had through the years, and for them to go with, what was it, Wolfgang Felber's old livery from like the late 80s or something? It just didn't quite come off, I don't think.
Sorry, Ad, we hijacked you there. Go ahead.
No. I mean, that was one thing where HRC emerged as winners. I mean, they had a dog of a motorcycle this year, but their livery for Silverstone was pretty special. But I love the way that, you know, I think quite a few people in the paddock grumbled about it, you know, the extra work, the extra cost of doing that. But I think just the attention and the level of interest it generated gave something, I mean, certainly on social media and all the images and the videos and everything, it just created a little bit of extra buzz, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I mean, I think, you know, maybe one of these sort of, well, we saw it particularly mainly only with Valentino Rossi and Yamaha, who are quite proactive with this sort of stuff. But I think just sort of changing clothes now and again is a pretty good look. So I enjoyed Silverstone.
It was interesting that you mentioned about Rossi, because for me, his bikes were the biggest disappointment. The VR46 bikes at Silverstone didn't really do anything for me. At least with Gas, you can kind of make the excuse that they don't have that much of a history, whether you wanted to go with a Tech 3 livery or whatever. But the Ducati ones didn't look great. The VR46 ones didn't look great. Honda looked fantastic. Aprilia obviously won it for me. But Dave, what was your best event of the year?
Well, my best event of the year, this is going to be completely purely personal to me and to no one else. My best event of the year was Austria, because I got to go down there on my motorbike, ride all the way down and then ride all the way back. And any event I can go to on my motorbike is a very good event, despite the fact that we had the absolutely worst racing. It was lovely. Also got to visit KTM as well, which I really enjoyed. That was really, really interesting. Visited the Moto Hall again, enjoyed that. And just sort of like, you know, bumbling through Germany and Austria. The way down was not so great. I think it was like 40 degrees on the first day, and I was sweating a lot. Also, big shout out to Chris at Alpine Stars for helping me out with this pair of boots after my boots melted. So yeah, I mean, it was yes. So for me, it's Austria just for that. But again, also enjoyed Enjoyed Silverstone for the same reason. Got to ride around a bit. Enjoyed Sachsenring because went there and back with my lovely wife, and it was our wedding anniversary, and we stayed in a castle, and it was great. But basically, any race I go to on a motorbike, the rest I don't really care about.
You live in a fairy tale, Dave.
Yes, very much so, with my very own princess.
Did Colin Vail win in Austria as well? I mean,
He didn't.
No, he didn't.
It would have been the cherry.
Neil, what about you? What was your best event of the year?
I mean, from a personal point of view, I think Japan was great just because I hadn't been there before. First time in Japan as a country, first time to Motegi as well, and lots of little fun, unique things that you see in Japan that you don't in other places, such as fans politely applauding riders rather than cheering and shouting. Some of the very nice music, which sounds like it's been plucked out of a 1980s Super Nintendo game that they play over the PA system when you're walking into the track in the morning. Yeah, things like that. But I think in terms of proper events from the year, I mean, Sepang, the penultimate round of the year, was fantastic in that we had an epic qualifying. We had a sprint which was huge, pretty much decided the championship, and then we had 4 laps of outrageously good racing, the best racing of the year on the Sunday before everything tailed off. So I think Sepang maybe was the contender for the best event. I would also give a quick shout out to Jerez, because at that point, like we had previously mentioned, at that point in the year, it really did look as though we were going to have a kind of Pecco Mark fight for the championship with Martin as well. And just the reaction to Mark's podium in the stadium section.
Yeah, good shout.
Jumping up on the fence, fans thronging him. And I just remember feeling like MotoGP was back to its very, very best. It feels like it's been in transition for a few years after COVID and after Rossi's retirement, and with Marquez's injury, Mark coming back to the top. I feel like that was a moment which felt like, okay, we have proper championship fight going. It didn't quite pan out that way, but I remember there just being such a feel-good factor around MotoGP at that particular time. Everyone was thinking, this is great. We're in for a fantastic season. And maybe it didn't quite pan out that way. But I think Jerez has to be mentioned too.
I think the fact that Jerez is followed up by Le Mans as well, which is, like, for all the faults that Le Mans has had over the years, like, it is a great event. And it's definitely one that's worth going to. And it's always obviously interesting. For the best event is a personal thing, which is also one of those ways of saying which event, if you were a fan, would you want to go to. Buriram's an interesting one, because it's so different to everything else. And then obviously for Dave, being able to ride to Austria is pretty cool. It's a great setting for a race, but Jerez and Le Mans are definitely two for fans to look to get to. Neil, I like the fact that you said that was your first time going to Japan, and whenever you were talking about the music playing and just this great sense of just being somewhere completely different, I just assumed you were talking about the magic toilets in Japan whenever you said that. But Japan's definitely one that's worth going to, and that was one of the rounds where our
that was my favorite moment of the year, Steve. Before we get onto it, sitting on
whenever
the
that water hit you by
time.
surprise, you were there like, oh my goodness, this is the best event of the year. But Japan was interesting as well, because that was where Lucy, one of our prize winners, decided to go for her 2 paddock passes. So she went to the Japanese Grand Prix. I think our other paddock pass winner was Chad, and he went to Sachsenring. So they were 2 of our winners for the year. We're going to run that competition again for next season as well. So keep your eyes on our patreon.com/paddock pass podcast page to be able to get the latest information on that. But where there's our best events, there's our worst events as well. And Neil, which was your worst event of the year?
Well, I'm going to go against our beloved dear friend and colleague Adam Wheeler here, and I think I'm going to plump for Silverstone, because not only was the racing a bit of a letdown in MotoGP, it was the liveries were, that unveil on Thursday was cool, and some of the liveries were fantastic. But I'm judging this on, usually try and go out and watch trackside on a Sunday morning for MotoGP warm-up, and almost everywhere we've been, when we've gone out and watched tracksides, you can feel atmosphere, you can feel a bit of tension, excitement. And at Silverstone, it was just nothing. We went and watched around turn 1, turn 2, and there was barely anyone there. it was this big, open, vast circuit with not really much going on. And yeah, it just all felt a bit flat. And then the racing in the end, well, I mean, we had a really great Moto3 race, a really good Moto2 race with a home winner as well, which was cool. But yeah, just a 40,000 attendance. I felt Silverstone fell short this year and was a disappointment.
I think it's difficult to actually get, because of the layout of Silverstone, you don't get that sort of like cauldron atmosphere. It's so spread out, so large. It's absolutely one of my favourite motorcycle racing circuits. But yeah, just in terms of creating atmosphere, it's really, really difficult just because of the physical geography of it.
What about you though, Dave? What was the worst event of the year for you?
The worst event of the year were all
Obviously,
of the...
was the Solidarity Grand Prix whenever you got exceptionally sick and couldn't even come to work one of the days. But other than that, Dave.
Yeah, well, apart from that, yeah, no. The worst events are always the flyaways when I have to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning to watch bloody FP2 or whatever.
But can you call it a worst event when you've not actually attended?
Yeah, yes, I can, because
This is your podcast.
Awful. This is my podcast, and I shall.
You can do what you want.
Exactly. Yes. No. Exactly. Actually, if I was going to say the worst event that I actually attended, then maybe Misano 2 or else Aragon. Normally, I love Aragon, but because I didn't have my wife with me and I wasn't staying there for very long, I mean, the drive is just amazing, absolutely gobsmacking and beautiful. But it's so much less fun when I can't go walking in that magnificent landscape.
What about you, Ad? What was your worst event of the year?
Well, my nomination is actually Aragon. I mean, I kind of don't really like the circuit anyway, as we've gone over many times. And it was really getting to the thick end of getting this book finished. So it was quite hectic. It was the first sort of weekend I was working for Autosport and was just like thrown in at the deep end without any kind of knowledge of what really was going on. So it was extremely stressful. And I just thought that the race was pretty dull. The track was really slippery. And there was just this tsunami of Marc Marquez love, which just, became a bit repetitive after a while. So, that kind of event seemed like the longest one of the season. I mean, apart from, obviously, we had Pecco Bagnaia and Alex Marquez having a bit of a controversial crash. And, of all of the shocking moments of Bagnaia, I mean, the Portimao crash of Marquez, the fall in Malaysia. I mean, it's ironic that two of the crashes that cost Bagnaia the most this year were two of his best tracks, Misano and Malaysia and Sepang. But that one in Aragon, he was really lucky not to get injured. Was pretty. The aftermath of it was quite sort of scary after the initial contact. But that Grand Prix. I mean, the only good thing was it was nice and hot, so we have to give it a mark for that.
Yep, our McDonald's at the end of that Sunday night ad was rather subdued and I wouldn't say depressing, but it wasn't one of our finest meals of the year.
Yeah, needs must.
I really thought you were going to say that was one of the highlights of the weekend, Neil, and that was going to bring us straight into our favourite moments of the season. But maybe it could be our favourite meals of the season, and it could be that McDonald's still, the only bit of bright light at the end of that weekend. What was your favourite moment, though, Neil?
It's always very difficult to condense a full 20 race season, Steve, into a single moment. But I've got a selection, if you don't mind. I'll be very brief, I promise.
Christmas selection boxes are a thing at this time of year, Neil.
Right, exactly. I mean, one of them was, if we're looking at overtakes this season, Bagnaya's first lap in Jerez, going from, I think, 7th on the grid to first in one single lap was breathtaking and was also just like, okay, this guy means business and this guy is a world champion for a reason. That was just a moment that stands out. I'm also going to think of Pedro Acosta's performance in Portimao, just the second round of the season. I mean, what was a pretty turgid race was enlivened no end by Acosta riding through, really established proper MotoGP names like Jack Miller, Brad Binder, Marc Marquez, Pecco Bagnaia, and just picking them off as if they were, average kind of Moto2 riders. It was absolutely incredible. And he went on, of course, to become the second youngest ever podium finisher in the Premier class. Was it the youngest? Oh man, I'll have to go back and look that up.
If he needed to win to be the youngest winner, didn't he?
But he was maybe the second or third youngest podium finisher in Premier class history. Anyway, Yes. And yeah, those were great ones. I mean, the first 3 laps of Sepang as well were absolutely sensational. Just brilliant, brilliant action. And then from a personal point of view, I already mentioned Japan, loving being at Twin Ring Motegi. Also getting to watch. I think I say this in every season review show, but getting to watch warm up at Phillip Island on the inside of Stoner Corner is just a treat that. Is I mean, words can't really describe just how much fun that is. It just reminds you absolutely why you're doing this job. That was very special.
And Dave, what about you?
I suppose. I mean, my favourite moment was riding a motorbike to Austria there and back, but I've already said that. So I think I'm going to go for. I mean, Neil is spot on about those first 3 laps at Sepang were absolutely sensational. But I'm going to go for that moment when Marquez passed Pecco Bagnaia in the stadium section in Jerez. Like just the place exploded, and you sense that excitement again. That for me was what made it. That sort of like really set things up for a lot of things. And Pecco giving as good as he got. But perhaps my favourite moment was a moment which has not yet been shown on TV, which is Marquez and Pecco Bagnaia having a very interesting discussion after their little coming together in Portimao outside the steward's office.
Yeah,
so
I think that would be everyone's favorite moment if
they show
published.
it. Yeah,
I don't really understand why you don't publish it though, because we want to have that. You want to have that rivalry. You want people to see that there's a bit about the riders, and I think that was one of those things that whenever I heard about it, I immediately thought, good on you, Pecco, because you expect Pecco to back down, and he was shown that he wasn't gonna. So I thought that was definitely a good moment, Dave.
Yeah, 100%.
Adam, what about you? What was your favourite moment of the season?
Well, like Neil, I've got a little selection, mainly sort of personal, but I love the fact how Pedro Acosta was riding in Qatar in terms of on-track stuff. I think, his move on Marquez was nominated for one of the overtakes of the year. And, I just thought there was a recipe in 2024, wasn't there, of Marquez tending to fumble or drop the ball during qualifying and then have this resurgence through the race. And he was the main sort of protagonist in terms of giving us some action highlights all the way through the year. But then I think Acosta was very much sort of the wild card. I mean, he was a surprise. I think 5 podium finishes in his rookie season. Of course, he had the all too predictable rookie year in that he made mistakes, crashed at points when he shouldn't have done. He went a little bit too far with trying to set up and refine the setup of the RC16, and then had to backtrack and eventually sort of rediscovered his mojo. So I think, so whenever Pedro Acosta was at the thick end of the action, then he was providing some delectable moments. Otherwise, I love the Indonesian fan parade. Just to see that amount of people on the streets, the amount of public, I mean, all kind of demographics as well, to sort of honoring and cheering MotoGP was fantastic to see. I mean, we don't usually get an impression through the TV of witnessing how popular MotoGP is at Mandalika street circuit, but you could see certainly on the island of Lombok, and when they sort of ferried the riders through, how kind of how impactful MotoGP is in that country. So that was cool. And then also, just on a personal note, we played MotoGP football in some pretty cool places. We were in the Barcelona training ground for the Solidarity GP. Monte Castillo pitch in Jerez was pretty nice, and we played at the Barca sort of facility in Cota, which was not too bad if it wasn't for the mosquitoes, and also a nice pitch near Ascende, which was all right.
And you forgot to mention Jorge Martin's championship celebration, where he went from Martinet to
oh,
Terminator.
Goodness, how can I leave that off the list?
Yeah, just what I wanted to add 1 or 2 quick things which I forgot to mention. One of them was qualifying at Sepang, which was one of the best qualifying sessions I think I've ever seen, where Martin and Bagnaia were trading blows and putting just outrageous lap times in that no one else could live with. I think Alex Marquez in third was nearly a full second slower than Bagnaia's pole time. I mean, that was pretty stunning. And I did have one more, and I've forgotten it. Maybe we can edit this. What was the other one? Oh fuck.
Can I give Neil a reprieve and let him think for a moment? And one of the annoyance I had from this year's was the amount of fawning and hype over Andrea Iannone coming back for the Malaysian Grand Prix. I mean, he was fucking 10th in FP1, and it was like the second coming, you know. And then, of course, predictably, he didn't even get any points. And, you know, it just seemed that people asking him if he's going to go for a stake again became a bit more of a story than him actually riding back in MotoGP.
It was interesting that he was afterwards. He was saying, "God, I've forgotten how hard this is. Just how much more difficult it is to ride a MotoGP now because of everything that's involved with it, with the ride-out devices and all the rest of it." But yes, that was. I mean, like I was very much immune to the Iannone hype before it even started. So that was not a train I was ever going to board.
It just seemed that the hype machine as well, you know, really worked into sort of fever at points this year, whether it was Spanish commentators dissing each other on social media and issuing 10 to 15 minute videos explaining their credentials and their experience.
If we didn't have the pettiness of journalists, we'd have nothing going for ourselves. That we are a very petty breed. And as a commentator, I can say commentators are even pettier. The only thing more petty than a commentator or a journalist is a photographer. And never forget that.
I had a conversation once with someone who is on TV, and they explained to me that there are two types of TV people. There are TV people, and there are people who happen to end up on TV. And people who happen to end up on TV are absolutely generally lovely, and TV people are absolutely awful because they live.
What are you saying?
Yeah, exactly. They live for, they don't exist if a camera isn't on them. If they're not the center of attention, then they simply don't exist. No names, no pack drills, but yeah, this is very true. The fact that two TV commentators should get into a very public and pathetic spat is hilarious and typical.
I would say as well, Dave, you were a TV man for a season.
I'm
not gonna say which one you were, but you're an asshole.
all I can say is I didn't have the TV the camera on me much. They kept sort of saying, "Do you want to be on?" No, for God's sake, please, God, no. Why would you want this face on your TV?
Neil, have you remembered your other favorite moment?
I haven't, Steve, but I think I've given already maybe 4 or 5, so we can move on.
Good enough. Yeah. Good enough. And Adam's already said one of the things that annoyed him this season. Ad, are you going to leave that as your big annoyance for the season, or was there anything else? I also want to rule out ride height devices and aero because we're taking them for granted. But was there anything other than Iannone that annoyed you, Ad?
No, I mean, I kind of mentioned the hype and the clickbaity shit. I mean, everything from Jorge Martin appearing in one Spanish TV chat show to another, just the frivolities of MotoGP on the periphery. Everyone's getting very shouty, it seems, and there's no need for it.
That's the algorithm for you. The algorithm demands outrage because outrage sells.
Let's all live on Blue Sky.
I will say one thing. Blue Sky will turn to shit as well. But I will say one thing about the algorithm and the rage and all that kind of thing. One of the things that we found this year is on our Patreon page with the Paddock Notes show and lots of our additional content, we've had a lot of people show a lot of support for it. We haven't gone down the route of trying to be clickbaity with it. We haven't gone down the route of just trying to be controversial with it. It's our analysis of what we're seeing in MotoGP, what we've seen from all the feedback that we've gotten, whether it's on Patreon, whether it's on the Discord server where all of our patrons are able to sign up. People have really enjoyed the content through the course of this year. So if you want to sign up, patreon.com/Paddock Pass podcast. We've got a 10% discount on it at the moment. You can also gift a subscription for a year as a Christmas present or anything like that. And for me, as almost an outsider to the MotoGP paddock now, it's been very good to have the Paddock Notes show as my way to keep up to date over Grand Prix weekend. 15 or 20 minutes, and it brings me all the news.
I've remembered what I was going to say. Jorge Martin.
Oh my God!
Yeah, Jorge Martin signing for Aprilia. I mean, that Monday after Mugello was insane when the news came through that Mark was going to the factory team. That Martin had basically reacted to that almost immediately, signed for Aprilia. I mean, that was also a massive moment where we were like, "Whoa."
Was it better than a dinner that you had out, though, Neil? That moment, is it the one that stands out? Because it's taken you 15 minutes to think about it.
Exactly. It is telling that a McDonald's dinner with Ad at like midnight after Aragon came to my mind quicker than that. So maybe it wasn't the moment of the year.
It was such a weird day as well, because it was supposed to be a test and it was just sort of like raining on and off all day. And a few people did a few laps, and then we're all standing around thinking, well, this is a complete waste of time. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, something's happening. And then we got the Aprilia signing. It was very exciting.
Dave, what was your one gripe for the year? The one moment of annoyance that stands out?
My biggest annoyance is that I'm only allowed one annoyance, because I have I have a list as long as your arm.
Treasure trove.
Absolutely, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
I'll give you 1 minute, Dave. You've got 60 seconds to read them off.
Apart from the calendar, which is an absolute shit show, and all sorts of other things, but I'm going to narrow it down to just one thing, which is the lack of statistics for sprint races, and the way that sprint races are treated within statistics and everything else is because they're not being treated as proper races. And so if I want to find out how many podiums someone has in sprint races, I actually have to go and look for it myself. I actually have to go back and count them. They're not publicly available anywhere. I can find out exactly how many podiums each of the riders had in the main races, but not in the others. It's a manual task, and it's incredibly tedious. And it is, frankly, it's Dorna's job. They're treating sprint races as a sort of a second-rate, some kind of second-rate thing. Well, they're hyping it up on the one hand and using them to boost the fake spectator numbers, which I shall get to in a moment. But they're also not counting them in the statistics anywhere. They need to start including them. I mean, like, a podium is a podium as far as I'm concerned. I think sprint podiums should count as race podium, as GP podiums.
You got 15 seconds.
But anyway, if they would just fix that, if they would just be able to tell me how many points a rider has scored in a sprint race, how many times they've been on the podium in a sprint race, that would fix about sort of 60% of my gripes. And then the spectator numbers, no, they weren't. I don't know, 300,000 people who attended during the weekend. There were 100,000 people, each of which who attended over 3 days. So stop. I mean, it's not restricted to MotoGP. This is restricted. This is common across all across all sports. People count spectator numbers. They count each day as if it was an individual event, and it isn't. It's the same people coming back. That is absolutely fake. Really, really, really annoying. And I wish they would just release the Sunday numbers and acknowledge that about 95% of the people who turned up on Sunday or on Saturday also turned up on Sunday.
Dave, I would like to say that your little wrap up there reminded me a lot of Father Ted winning the Golden Cleric, and his speech consisted of the people that have fecked him off over the years. And now I'm going to talk about But Neil, what about you? What was your annoyance for the year? Your gripe?
I mean, there's one or two small petty things. I'm all for, I think I maybe mentioned this on last year's show as well, I'm all for people bringing cardboard signs that they've designed at home. And
this was in your preview, by the way. This was in your season preview.
Was it?
Yeah.
Right, yeah. Well, do something other than asking for riders' gloves. Ask for a boot, ask for their leathers, maybe ask for their helmet, ask for
underpants,
a high five, ask for a selfie. The kind of continual ask for gloves, I think, can be slightly grating.
Fabio, give me your hand in marriage.
Yes, exactly. Let's see some proper declarations of devotion and love. That's what I want to see.
It's the most practical thing, though, Neil, isn't it? It's the easiest thing to carry. I think you're being a bit grinchy here. I mean, we are getting close to Christmas.
I mean, have you just listened to Dave mouth off for about 90 seconds and you're calling me the Grinch? I find that most unfair. Yeah, I guess the sort of, I've basically just abandoned Twitter for its kind of rage machine ways, and it just really tires me. I can't really be arsed with it. So that's definitely one thing as well. And I mean, if we're being serious, what MotoGP MotoGP was this year, essentially a championship in which Ducati dominated completely, was also a bit of a disappointment. I mean, you have to laud Ducati's domination, how impressive it was. But the fact that they managed to score a ludicrous number of points over the season, I think they scored in the Constructors' Championship 722 points from a total of 740. I mean, that tells you kind of all you need to know. They won 19 out of 20 races. And we had the situation in Buriram where they finished in each of the top 8 spots in the race, which I don't think is a sign of where we want the championship to be. The fact that Aprilia and KTM couldn't really hold up anything to Ducati throughout this year was disappointing, and I really hope that can be amended for next year, because too much domination from one manufacturer isn't the best thing.
As ever, I think Neil's completely on the money with his observation there. But just about the event attendances, isn't by definition counting people coming through the gate of each day and then summarizing all for an event attendance on the money? I mean,
No.
why? I mean, just because they're the same people, it doesn't matter if it's a Saturday or a Sunday. I mean, for that particular event, you had 100,000 on Saturday and you had 100,000 on Sunday.
Yeah, but ticket prices. The ticket price for a 3-day event is, for a start, much cheaper than buying 3 separate tickets. The way that they say it is, those 300,000, I don't know, 290,000, 200 and whatever thousand spectators turned up. This is not true. 290,000 people did not turn up. The total attendance might be 290,000. That's fair enough. I'm prepared to accept that. But that's not the same as saying 290,000 people. There were 290,000 spectators. There might be 110, 120,000 spectators on the Sunday, but on the Saturday there were fewer, and on the Friday there were even fewer. Also, they started adding the Thursday, the Thursday attendances as well, which is very much the shrinkflation version of spectator numbers. So, I mean, it's just it is fake. It is basically fake. Not saying the numbers. I mean, well, let's not even attempt to go anywhere near the way that attendances are counted, because there have certainly been races where you get a number quoted at you and you raise an eyebrow archly at it, because it doesn't tally with your sense of how many people are actually there. But I'm prepared to accept that. It's just not this like counting 3-day.
Well, it's like TV ratings as well, isn't it? I mean, nobody really knows the real truth. But just 2 things very quickly, unrelated. Our Alpine Stars Paddock Pass podcast fantasy league. I apologise for the slight corruption that took place in 2024, but we do have a winner that hasn't contacted us, and you're missing out on a bag full of free Alpine Star goodies. So you signed up to our league, you showed all of us that you're completely superior to us in terms of knowledge, except for Dave, because he couldn't quite hack into your team somehow. So get in contact, because we want to give you some prizes. And another quick worthy mention for the Discord channel, Steve, you mentioned it, but we started that community-based chat this year, and it's been brilliant. I mean, the people on there are great. The passion for MotoGP, the knowledge about MotoGP as well. I mean, it's almost become like a little bit of a daily check-in system for me, just to sort of keep up with what's going on and what stories are being posted around in MotoGP. It's been really cool. I mean, if people want to join us on Patreon, they can join that community. And I think it's now, as Neil mentioned, places like X, Twitter is sort of quite toxic and just very opinionated and just opinionated and full of just noise. And so to actually sort of engage with people that care about MotoGP and have some very sort of erudite views is good fun.
Danny Team 32 is the name of the winner. Resides in Spain, I believe. So Danny Team 32, get in touch, because you have an Alpine Stars goodie bag awaiting you.
I would say that my biggest annoyance is, as I'm sure everyone watching on YouTube can see, I'm getting very distracted here by a dog attacking a Christmas tree in another room. And that's my biggest annoyance for the year. But
Not
what I would say,
Steve.
I would say about the attendances, that it shouldn't be a major gripe, because there were over 3 million people went to MotoGP races this year, which also means
exactly it.
Which also means
exactly
Dave,
what I'm talking about.
Dave, we've covered
you be
this.
quiet.
Yeah.
You be quiet, Dave. Because if you'd like to sponsor the Paddock Pass podcast and get yourself out there to over 3 million people going to Grand Prix for the year, send us an email to team@paddockpasspodcast.com. But I think that for me, one of the big things that's been an annoyance for me is the fact I haven't been able to get to a MotoGP race this year, because I'm hoping next year I'll be able to right that wrong, because it's been something I've missed out on over the course this year.
Well, get off the golf course then.
I don't want to do that. I don't want to do anything crazy like that, Ad. You know, I'm still going to 18 events for the year, so I don't want to add too many of them. But it's one of those things where when you look at what we've seen in GP over the course of the last couple of years, we are looking at Pedro Acosta coming through. David Alonso this year was obviously the big star from the feeder classes as well, or the Moto3 and Moto2 classes. So I think that there's a lot going for next year, and I'm already excited for that. But we'll have another show next week looking back at our top riders of the year. And it's going to be really interesting to see where you boys place everyone, because I think when we look at our top 5, we can probably pick off the top of each other's heads the 5 riders we're going to choose, but the order we put them in is going to be an interesting one. And that'll be our last show for the year as well. And we'll obviously have other bits and pieces on Patreon over the course of the next few weeks. I've got a few bits queued up with Gordo for World SBK, and some more Race of My Life features and different things that we've been able to put onto Patreon over the course of this season. So it's worth checking out patreon.com/Paddock Pass Podcast for those. But as ever, a big thank you to Renthal Street, Fly Racing, and KTM for their support through the year of the Paddock Pass Podcast. And like I said, we'll be back next year with our top riders of the year.